Good morning, Phoenix class, and welcome to today's maths lesson. I can convert fractions to decimals. So let's remember what we were doing yesterday. We were looking at a decimal and then converting it to a fraction. So if we had a 6 in the thousands column, as here, we know that the 6 becomes the numerator and the thousandth becomes our denominator. So in this one, we've got the 6 in our tenths column, so our denominator becomes 10, so it's 6/10. And then over here, our 6 is now in our hundredths column, so we can turn that into a fraction over 100. And then we looked at finding equivalent fractions, didn't we? If we put a 0 in there, we now have 60 thousandths. Here's a little recap exercise for you. So what I want you to think about is which one is larger than, smaller than, or equal to. A place value grid will also help you here. So let's do the first one together. We are saying that 1/10 is it equal to, larger or smaller than 0.75. So let's use our place value grid and put in our decimal 0.75. So our last digit is in our hundredths column. So we know that 75 becomes our numerator and our denominator is 100. But we can't compare this to our 1/10 over here because we don't have the same denominator. So we need to do something with our 1/10 so that we find an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. What do we times 10 by to get to 100? Yeah, you're quite right. We times it by 10. And remember, what we do to the denominator, we also do to the numerator. So 1 times 10 is going to give us 10. Now we've got two fractions with the same denominator, and we can now compare them. So which is greater? Is it 10 hundredths, bigger or smaller than 75 hundredths? We can now quite clearly see that 75 hundredths is the bigger of the two. I will leave you to have a go with the rest of those. Your answers are on the next slide. So our first problem today. Sophia pours 1/10 of a liquid, 1/10 of a litre of liquid from the flask into beaker A. She then pours 3/4 of a liquid into beaker B. Sophia reads the scale of each beaker. What measurements will she record? So 1/10. Let's have a look at what she puts in beaker A first. So we already know from the work that we've done before that we have our columns, our tenths column, we can also write as that. Our hundredths column is the same as having a denominator of 100. So our thousands column, that's the same as having a denominator of 1,000. How many tenths did Sophia pour? She poured 1/10. So therefore we can put a 1 in our tenths column. Put our decimal point in and we put a placeholder in. So she poured in to A 0.1 of a litre. This time into beaker 2, she pours 3/4 of a litre. Well, my first problem is that the denominator of that fraction is not 10, 100 or 1,000. So that's going to make it tricky. So what I'm going to need to do is make sure I can find an equivalent fraction that has either a 10, 100 or 1,000 as the denominator. Now, can I times 4 by anything that is going to give me 10? No, but I can times 4 by 25 and that will give me 100. We all know, don't we? What we do to the denominator, we also need to do to the numerator. So I need to times the numerator by 25. So I need 3 lots of 25. Some of you will be thinking, oh, I don't know my 25 times table. But I think you probably do. Because 25 at 25 is 50, so that's 2 times. Add on another 25 for 3 times is going to give us 75. I can now write this in my place value chart. So I'm going to look at the hundredths column because my denominator is 100. I've got 75 hundredths. So the 5 goes in the 100 column. So that means the 7 must go in the tenths column. My decimal point stays put, and I need a placeholder 0 in my ones column. So the amount of liquid poured into beaker B is 0.75 of a litre. By the way, how many millilitres are in a litre? I hope you're saying 1,000. You'd be quite right. Let's have a look. Here we're doing this one again, and you can see here we've got the place value chart. We've put the 1, the numerator, into the tenths column because the denominator was 10. We might have worked the second part out in a slightly different way. If you already knew that 1/4 was 0.25, you could have just times it by 3 to get 0.75. So the second part of this question is how much liquid is left in the flask? So we had we poured in 1/10. B, we poured in 3/4. So we could add the fraction, find the common denominator and add the fractions. But we've already done a lot of working out, haven't we? We said that 1/10 was the same as 0.1 of a litre. And we said that 3/4 was the same as 0.75 of a litre. So if we know those two already, what we can do is add them together. Now, you've got to be very careful at this point that you line up your decimal points correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub out this bit here, and I'm going to make this into a column addition. So 0.1. What do you notice about my columns? I've got a gap here, haven't I? What could I put in there that doesn't change the value of 0.1 but would make the adding up easier? Yes, you're correct. I could put a 0. So 5 plus 0 is 5. 7 plus 1 is 8. Decimal point underneath. 0 plus 0 is 0. So altogether, I've poured out 0.85 of a litre. But the question is asking me how much is left. So I need to do 1, take away 0.85. Again, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to change that into a column. Take away 1, biggest number on the top, 0.85. This looks a very strange takeaway and quite tricky to do because I've got gaps. Let me put in my decimal point. Obviously, if there is no decimal point in a number, it comes at the right-hand end after the ones column. I've still got 2 gaps here. What could I put in here that will make this takeaway easier to do? I could put 2 zeros as placeholders. Now I could do 0 take away 5. Well, I can't do that, so I'm going to have to borrow. So I'm going to borrow my 1 whole. So I've got 10 tenths. I can now borrow 1 of my tenths. So I've got 10 hundredths. So now I've got 10 hundredths take away 5 hundredths. So 10 take away 5 is 5. I've got 9 tenths take away 8 tenths, so that's going to give me 1 tenth. I'm going to put my decimal point in. I've got 0 ones take away 0 ones, which is 0. So my answer would be 0.15 litres. Okay, let's have a look at this one. This is the working out, and there's a lovely bar there drawn for you as well. And that just shows the method that we completed on the previous slide. So what will 355 thousandths of a kilogram look like on the display of this balance? Well, we know in 355 thousandths, we've got a 5 thousandth, we've got a 500th, and we've got a 3 tenths. So, starting with our thousandths column, we can put a 5 in our thousandths column. We can put a 5 in our hundredths column. We can put a 3 in our tenths column. What do we need to put in there? We need to put in a 0 at the beginning. Convert these fractions into decimals. So we've got 6 20ths. Now, we could convert that so it's got a denominator of 100, or we could convert that so that we've got a denominator of 10. So 6 20ths. What do we do to get to something over 10? We can divide by 2. And you already know what you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. So 6 divided by 2 is going to be 3. So 3 tenths. So again, if you're thinking about my place value grid, we want a 3 in our tenths column. There we are. 7 20ths. Can I make that into an equivalent fraction over 10? Why not? Why can't I make 7/20 into an equivalent fraction over 10? Because the numerator is an odd number. So we would need to divide by 2, but we wouldn't get a whole number. And we can't have a decimal number as the number for our numerator. So instead of dividing, what do I times 20 by to get to 100? You're right, we need to times it by 5. And what we do to the denominator, we do to the numerator. So what's 7 times 5? 7 times is 35. Now we can convert that as a decimal. So we put our 0 in, that's in our ones column. We've got 35 hundredths. So the 5 needs to be in the second column, in the hundredths column, and our 3 needs to go in our tenths column. I'll let you finish those other two. Which ones do you put as a equivalent fraction over 10? Which one do you need to make into an equivalent fraction over 100? Into our practice book. So number 1, write each fraction on a place value grid. Let's just do the first one together. So we've got 3 hundredths. So find your hundredth column, put in the last digit, which is a 3. If we've got any gaps, we are going to put placeholders in there. So you get 0.03. You can do the same with all the rest. B, just think about what the scale goes up in. Going up in 1/100ths. Let's have a look at question 2. Question 2A. Which decimal is equivalent to 77 tenths? So place value grid, you can draw that out. 77 tenths. So we're putting the last digit of a numerator in the tenths column. So that will be 7. So the other 7 is going to have to go there. Don't forget the decimal point. I'll let you do B on your own. So number 3, use a fraction rule to help you convert these fractions to decimals. So 2/5. So you work out where 2/5 is, that takes us up to here. So you know that the decimal is going to be 0.4. 8/20, count up to 8/20, what's the decimal equivalent? Question 4, use equivalent fractions to convert these to decimals. So what do you do to 50 to get to 100? You times by 2. What you do to the denominator, you also do to the numerator. Once you've got your once you've got your fraction over 100, 10 or 1,000, you can then easily convert it to a decimal using your place value grid. Question 5, write the decimals that the arrows point to. So this is 7 tenths. And this is 71 hundredths. So what has this gone up with by? What would this one be here first? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what is it going to go up by? How many hundredths? I want you to think about what 7 tenths is equivalent to in hundredths. What do you do to 10 to get to 100? You times it by 10. What you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. So that is 70 hundredths. If you feel like you need more practice, there's some more here. Alternatively, have a go at the challenges. You really should do one or the other. And then finally finish the lesson off by completing your reflection. What is the same and what is different about converting from decimals to fractions and converting from fractions to decimals? Have fun today.